Martin Hayes had spent 12 years teaching chemistry to teenagers who thought the periodic table was a furniture catalog. He'd loved every minute of it. The spark of understanding in a student's eyes when a concept clicked. The satisfaction of turning abstract formulas into tangible understanding. The quiet pride of shaping young minds. That love of teaching, ironically, was what had destroyed his life. It started with curiosity, pure, scientific curiosity. Martin had been preparing a lesson on organic synthesis when he stumbled across a forum discussing methamphetamine. Not because he wanted to manufacture drugs, he had no interest in distribution, no desire for profit, but because the chemistry itself was fascinating. The reactions were elegant. The procedures were complex. The challenge was irresistible. He'd set up a small lab in his garage, just to see if he could do it, just to understand the process, just to prove that his knowledge was sufficient to execute what textbooks described but never demonstrated. He'd succeeded, produced a small batch of methamphetamine that would have tested at 98% purity. Never sold a gram, never intended to. He'd simply wanted to know if the theories in his head could translate to reality. The DEA had a different interpretation when they raided his home. Now, 14 months into a 4-year sentence at Coldwater Correctional Facility, Martin understood that curiosity without wisdom was just another form of stupidity. The blonde hair that had once been thick was thinning now, receding at the temples in a way that made him look older than his 38 years. The glasses he wore, black frames, modern style, had been broken twice in his first month, repaired with contraband tape that left them slightly crooked. His frame was lean, almost fragile, the build of a man who'd spent his life in classrooms rather than gyms. In prison, that physical weakness made him invisible. Inmates dismissed him as a soft, white-collar criminal. No threat, no value, no interest. The guards barely noticed him. He worked his assigned detail in the prison laundry without complaint, ate his meals in silence, and spent his recreation time in the corner of the yard reading whatever battered paperbacks the prison library offered. But invisibility had been his strategy from day one. While everyone dismissed him as harmless, Martin had been conducting the most important research of his life, a comprehensive analysis of Coldwater Correctional's chemical inventory, driven, of course, by his devotion to chemistry and a mind that could never stop observing and investigating. The prison, like all institutions, ran on chemicals, industrial cleaners for the floors, sodium hypochlorite, ammonia-based solutions, quaternary ammonium compounds. The laundry used detergents with sodium carbonate, enzymes, optical brighteners. The maintenance shop stocked paint thinners, acetone, mineral spirits, various solvents. The kitchen had concentrated cleaning agents, degreasers, acids for descaling equipment. Individually, these were mundane institutional supplies. But to someone with Martin's knowledge, they were a chemical laboratory waiting to be assembled. He'd spent 14 months cataloging everything. Which supplies were stored where? Which guards were lazy about inventory checks? Which inmates had access to which areas? What time shipments arrived? How waste was disposed of? Every variable, every detail, every potential resource. He'd also mapped the prison's social chemistry, less precise than molecular bonds, but no less important. Coldwater had two major power structures. The Aryan Brotherhood controlled the North Wing and most of the contraband tobacco market. The Latin Kings, led by a man named Rico Vega, dominated the South Wing and controlled drug distribution. Between these two poles, smaller groups orbited: the Black Guerrilla Family, various prison gangs, and independent operators trying to survive in the gaps. Martin had observed all of it with the same methodical attention he'd once applied to chemical reactions: cause and effect, action and consequence. variables, and outcomes. He'd been content to remain invisible, serving his time, planning to return to teaching once released, though he knew no school would ever hire him again. He'd been prepared to live with that consequence of his curiosity. Then, Tyler Morrison arrived at Coldwater. Martin was folding laundry when he saw the new intake group being processed through the common area. 23 faces, various ages, various crimes, all wearing the same shell-shocked expression of men entering a world they didn't understand. One face made Martin's hands freeze mid-fold. Tyler Morrison, 22 years old, had been 17 when he'd sat in Martin's advanced chemistry class. A bright kid with potential who'd chosen easier paths. Martin had tried to mentor him, spent extra time helping him understand organic chemistry, written him a college recommendation letter. Apparently, Tyler had taken those organic chemistry lessons to heart, just not in the way Martin had intended. Their eyes met across the common area. Tyler's expression cycled through surprise, recognition, then something more complicated. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. Martin carefully finished folding the towel in his hands and returned to his work. But his mind was racing. Tyler knew what Martin had done. More importantly, Tyler knew what Martin knew. And in prison, knowledge was currency. For 2 weeks, they avoided each other. Tyler was processed into the South Wing, Latin King's territory, while Martin remained in the neutral zone of the laundry detail. Martin hoped the kid would keep his mouth shut, serve his time, and they'd both leave this place without their paths crossing again. That hope died on a Thursday afternoon when Tyler approached him during yard time. "Mr. Hayes." Tyler's voice carried the same nervous respect it had in the classroom, but there was something else underneath now. Fear, maybe, or obligation. "Tyler." Martin kept his voice neutral, his eyes on his book. "I heard you were here." "Yeah, well, made some bad choices." Tyler glanced over his shoulder at a group of inmates watching from near the basketball court. Latin Kings, all of them, including a muscular man in his mid-30s with tattoos covering his neck and forearms. Rico Vega. Martin had never spoken to him, but he'd observed enough to understand the man's position. "We all have," Martin said quietly. "Listen, Mr. Hayes, I need to talk to you about something. Something important." Tyler's voice dropped lower. "People here know what you did, what you made." Martin's stomach tightened. "I made a mistake. I paid for it. That's the end of the story." "Is it?" Tyler shifted his weight nervously. "Because Rico, he's interested. In your skills." "I don't have any skills that matter in here, Tyler. I'm just doing my time." "Mr. Hayes," Tyler's voice carried a pleading tone. "They know you made crystal. High purity. They know you're a chemist. And they know that with the right materials, you could produce here, inside." Martin closed his book slowly, finally looking directly at his former student. "And you told them this." "I didn't have a choice. They asked about my case, about my background. I mentioned you were my teacher. They looked you up, saw your charges, put 2 and 2 together." Tyler glanced back at Rico's group again. "They want to meet with you. Talk about an opportunity." "No." "Mr. Hayes." "No, Tyler. I'm not interested in opportunities. I'm interested in finishing my sentence and leaving. Tell Rico I appreciate the offer, but I'm not his guy." Tyler's face showed genuine distress. "It doesn't work like that here. You don't just say no to Rico." "Watch me." Martin returned to his book, a clear dismissal. Tyler stood there for another moment, then walked back toward Rico's group. Martin didn't look up, but he tracked the conversation in his peripheral vision. Tyler talking, gesturing apologetically. Rico's expression hardening. Other gang members watching Martin with new interest. He'd just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in cold water. But he'd also made a choice. He wasn't going to let his mistake compound into something worse. That night, lying on his bunk, Martin considered his options. He could report the approach to the guards, but that would mark him as a snitch and make him a target for everyone. He could request protective custody, but that was essentially solitary confinement for the remainder of his sentence. He could try to negotiate some middle ground, but men like Rico didn't negotiate. They dominated. The smart play was to stay the course, remain invisible, finish his sentence. Rico would find another chemist or another scheme. Eventually, this would blow over. The approach came 3 days later, but not from Tyler. Martin was working his shift in the laundry, feeding industrial washing machines, when 2 Latin Kings members appeared in the doorway. One was a young guy covered in gang tattoos. The other was older, scarred, with the cold eyes of someone who'd done violence, and would do it again, without hesitation. "Rico wants to talk," the older one said. It wasn't an invitation. They walked him through the prison corridors during a shift change. The guards were understaffed and distracted, probably by design. They took him to a storage room in the south wing, one of those spaces that officially didn't exist in the prison's monitored areas. Rico Vega sat on a crate like it was a throne. Mid-30s, muscular, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without words. His neck and forearms were covered in intricate tattoos, gang symbols, prison art, a visual resume of violence and loyalty. His eyes were dark and calculating. "Martin Hayes." Rico's voice was surprisingly soft, almost conversational. The chemistry teacher who couldn't resist playing Walter White in his garage. "I'm not interested in your offer," Martin said immediately. "You don't know what my offer is." "I can guess. You want me to produce drugs using prison materials. My answer is no." Rico smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See? That's what I respect about teachers. Direct, honest, but also naive." He stood up, moving closer. "You think you get to say no in here? You think your sentence is what, 4 years? You serve your time quietly, get out, try to rebuild your life? That's the plan. Here's a better plan. You work for me. Use that chemistry brain to solve a problem. In exchange, your time here is comfortable, protected, easy. You say no." Rico's smile disappeared. "Your time here becomes very, very hard." "I'm not making drugs for you." The punch came fast, not from Rico, but from one of his men. Martin's glasses flew off, his head snapping back, pain exploding across his jaw. He stumbled, caught himself against a wall. "You don't understand how this works," Rico continued calmly, as if the violence was just punctuation. "I'm not asking. I'm telling. You're going to produce for me, or you're going to suffer. Maybe you think you can handle some beatings. Maybe you think you're tough enough. But I've got 4 years to break you, teacher. And I'm very, very patient." Another punch, this time to his ribs. Martin gasped, sliding down the wall. "Or maybe you think you'll tell the guards. Go ahead. See what happens to snitches in here. See how long you last in protective custody before someone gets to you. Because my reach extends beyond these walls, Mr. Hayes. I promise you that." Rico crouched down, grabbing Martin's chin, forcing eye contact. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to think about my offer. You're going to realize you don't have a choice. And in 3 days, Tyler is going to ask you again. And this time, you're going to say yes. Because the alternative is pain. A lot of pain. Understand?" Martin said nothing, his jaw throbbing, ribs screaming. "Good. We understand each other." Rico stood, stepping back. Clean him up. Send him back. They dumped Martin outside the laundry with his broken glasses and a story to tell the guards about tripping over equipment if anyone asked. No one asked. Guards learned not to see certain things in prison. Martin sat alone in his cell that night, pain radiating through his body, and made a calculation. Rico was right about one thing. Saying no wasn't an option. The threat was real. The consequences would be severe. He could endure some violence, but 4 years of systematic brutalization would destroy him. But Rico was wrong about something else. He'd assumed Martin was powerless, that his only choices were compliance or suffering. Rico had forgotten the most important lesson of chemistry. The right catalyst can change everything. Martin's hands weren't shaking as he retrieved a small notebook from under his mattress. 14 months of observations, chemical inventories, procedure notes, written in a personal shorthand only he could decipher. He'd spent a year learning this prison's chemistry. Now he was going to use that knowledge to execute the most elegant reaction of his career. Not production, destruction. He would appear to comply. He would produce for Rico, gain his trust, become valuable. And while doing so, he would engineer something far more sophisticated than simple drugs. He would weaponize chemistry itself against the men who thought they controlled him. Martin's broken glasses sat on his small desk. Behind them, his reflection in the small metal mirror showed a man who looked beaten, defeated, ready to break. It was a good performance. He'd need to maintain it for what came next, because Rico Vega had just made a critical error. He'd threatened a scientist. And scientists understand something that gangsters often forget. The most dangerous reactions are the ones you don't see coming. 3 days later, when Tyler approached him in the yard, Martin gave the answer Rico was waiting for. "I'll do it." Tyler's face showed relief mixed with guilt. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry. I didn't want—" "It's done, Tyler. Tell Rico I need a list of available materials and a workspace where I won't be interrupted." He's already arranged it. Maintenance storage room, B wing. 3rd shift. When most guards are rotating, you'll have 2 hours, 3 times a week. Martin nodded, his face carefully neutral. Inside, his mind was already calculating. 2 hours, 3 times a week. Enough time to establish a production process. More than enough time to engineer what he really needed. The first session came 2 nights later. They brought him to the storage room, the same one where Rico had beaten him. It was larger than he'd remembered, filled with maintenance supplies, cleaning equipment, industrial chemicals. Someone had cleared a workspace on a metal table and assembled a crude collection of equipment. Glass containers salvaged from the kitchen, rubber tubing from the medical supplies, metal bowls, plastic bottles with graduated markings scratched into the sides. Rico was there with 2 of his men, watching as Martin examined the setup. "This is what you have to work with," Rico said. "Can you produce?" Martin picked up a bottle of drain cleaner, checked the ingredients. Sodium hydroxide. Good. He examined a container of paint thinner. Acetone and toluene. Better. A jug of battery acid from the maintenance shop. Sulfuric acid. Perfect. "What do you want me to make?" Martin asked, though he already knew. "Meth. Crystal. Whatever you want to call it. High purity. Something that'll sell." Martin set down the bottles and looked at Rico directly. "With these materials, in this environment, I can produce methamphetamine. It won't be pharmaceutical grade, but it'll be better than anything else you can get in here. Probably 70 to 80% purity. How long? First batch? 2 weeks. I need to establish procedures, make sure the chemistry is stable. After that, I can produce a batch every week, maybe twice a week, if you can get me more pseudoephedrine. Rico smiled. Pseudoephedrine we can get. Some of the guys have connections with the medical staff. What else do you need? Privacy. No interruptions during production. Some reactions are temperature-sensitive and time-critical. If I'm rushed or distracted, the whole batch fails. You'll have privacy. But don't try anything cute, teacher. My guys will be outside the door. You try to make something other than what I ordered, you try to signal the guards, you try anything. You know what happens. I understand. Good. Start tonight. Show me you can deliver. For the next 2 weeks, Martin worked. Not just producing methamphetamine, but refining his understanding of the prison's chemical ecosystem. Every session, he cataloged new materials, tested reactions, mapped out procedures. The actual production was relatively straightforward, a simplified birch reduction using the chemicals available. It was crude compared to his garage setup, but it worked. The first batch yielded 40 grams of crystal methamphetamine at approximately 75% purity. When he presented it to Rico, the gang leader's expression shifted from skepticism to satisfaction. "This is good shit," Rico said, having clearly tested it already. "Better than what we've been getting from outside." "Chemistry is chemistry," Martin said quietly, regardless of the setting. "You're a valuable man, Mr. Hayes. Keep this up, and your time here will be very comfortable." Over the next month, Martin produced 6 more batches, each one consistent, each one profitable for Rico's operation. The Latin King's drug business expanded. Other inmates began showing Rico more respect. Even the Aryan Brotherhood, the other major power in cold water, took notice. Martin became valuable, protected. Rico's men made sure no one bothered him. His commissary account was mysteriously well-funded. Guards who'd ignored him before now nodded in acknowledgement, clearly paid off to look the other way. And all the while, Martin was conducting his real experiment. During each production session, he took careful notes. Not just about the methamphetamine synthesis, but about everything else in that storage room. The industrial solvents, the concentrated acids, the oxidizers used for maintenance work, the cleaning supplies with specific reactive properties. He began making small diversions, a few milliliters of sulfuric acid pocketed in a carefully sealed container, a small amount of potassium permanganate from the maintenance supplies, some magnesium powder from welding materials. Individually, these thefts were unnoticeable. The prison's inventory was sloppy, and no one was looking for missing chemicals anyway. Martin stored his collection in the laundry, hidden inside industrial washing machines that were broken and awaiting repair. No one checked them. No one cared. By his 8th production session, Martin had assembled everything he needed for Phase 2. The opportunity came when Rico summoned him for a meeting. "We've got a situation," Rico said, his tone more serious than usual. "The Brotherhood has been pushing into our territory. They want a piece of the drug trade. I need to send them a message." "What kind of message?" Martin asked. "The kind that establishes dominance. I want you to make a special batch, something stronger. I'm going to offer it to them as a peace gesture. Let them sell it. Make some profit. Show we can work together. But the product is going to be so good, so pure, that it establishes we're the ones with the real supply." Martin kept his face neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. "You want me to make a premium batch for your rivals?" "Exactly. Your best work. I want their people trying this shit and realizing they can't compete with our quality. It's a power play. I can do that, but I'll need a few extra days. Higher purity requires more careful synthesis. Take the time you need. This needs to be perfect. Perfect. Yes, it would be perfect. Martin spent the next week preparing. During his regular production sessions, he made his standard batches for Rico's distribution network. But in the privacy of those 2-hour windows, he also began assembling his masterpiece. The chemistry was elegant in its simplicity. Methamphetamine's molecular structure could be modified with relative ease if you knew what you were doing. A small substitution here, an additional reaction step there, and you could create something that looked identical, tested similar in crude analysis, but had vastly different physiological effects. Martin synthesized para-methoxymethamphetamine, a compound that shared methamphetamine's stimulant properties initially, but metabolized into something far more toxic. In small doses, it would seem like premium product. In the doses typical users took, it would cause severe cardiovascular stress, seizures, and in individuals with certain predispositions, death. He was careful. The synthesis required precision, and he couldn't afford mistakes. He used his salvaged chemicals, the sulfuric acid, the oxidizers, compounds he'd carefully hidden and preserved. The resulting product was crystalline, pure-looking, indistinguishable from his regular batches to anyone without sophisticated laboratory equipment. It was also a time bomb. On the designated day, Martin presented Rico with 50 grams of his premium batch, packaged separately from the regular production. "This is the best I can make with available materials," Martin said truthfully. "Approximately 90% purity. Your rivals will be impressed." Rico examined the crystals, clearly pleased. "Beautiful work, teacher. This is going to make a statement. When are you delivering it?" "Tonight. We've arranged a meeting with the Brotherhood's leadership. This gets distributed to their people first thing tomorrow." Rico clapped Martin on the shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed friendly if Martin didn't know what this man was capable of. "You've proven your value, Mr. Hayes. Keep this up, and we're going to have a very profitable relationship." Martin returned to his cell and waited. The explosion came 36 hours later. Not literal, but just as devastating. Word spread through the prison in whispers first, then in shouts. One of the Aryan Brotherhood's leaders, a man named Kurt Hendricks, had collapsed during morning yard time. Seizures, cardiac arrest, dead before the medical team could respond. Within hours, 2 more Brotherhood members were in the infirmary with similar symptoms. One would survive with permanent brain damage. The other died that evening. The prison went into immediate lockdown. Investigations launched. The warden ordered a complete search of all cells, all common areas, all storage facilities, and everyone knew exactly where to look for answers. They found Rico's operation within 4 hours, the storage room where Martin had been working, the remaining regular batches of methamphetamine, the crude equipment, the chemical supplies. They found Rico himself in his cell, along with documented evidence that Martin had been deliberately careful to leave behind. Notes about production schedules, distribution networks, payoffs to corrupted guards. What they didn't find was any connection between Martin and the deadly batch. Because Martin had been very, very careful about that. When the investigators interviewed him, 2 state corrections officials and a DEA agent brought in specifically for this case, Martin played his role perfectly. He was terrified, shaking, cooperative. "They forced me," he told them, his voice breaking in exactly the right places. "Rico Vega. He found out about my background, threatened me, said if I didn't produce for him, he'd kill me." "Why didn't you report this?" the DEA agent asked. "To who?" "Half the guards were on his payroll. I was scared. I just wanted to survive my sentence." "Tell us about the production process." Martin did. In careful detail, he described how Rico had forced him to make methamphetamine using prison materials, how he'd been threatened, beaten, coerced, how he'd complied out of fear for his life. And the batch that killed Hendricks? Rico told me to make something special, premium quality. He said it was for the Brotherhood, to establish dominance. Martin's voice dropped. I didn't know he was going to kill anyone. I just made what he ordered. I swear, I made the same formula I always made. I don't know what went wrong. The investigators exchanged glances. Martin read their expressions perfectly. They were buying it. A scared chemistry teacher, coerced by a violent gang leader, producing drugs under duress. The narrative fit. Did anyone else know about this operation? The second investigator asked. Tyler Morrison. He was Rico's intermediary. Brought me messages, set up the meetings. He knew everything. More notes, more questions. But Martin could feel the momentum shifting. They weren't investigating him as a suspect. They were treating him as a witness. The final question came from the DEA agent. Mr. Hayes, would you be willing to testify about this operation? About Rico Vega's coercion, his distribution network, his corruption of prison staff? Martin met the agent's eyes. Yes, I'll tell you everything. The aftermath was surgical in its precision. Rico Vega was transferred under maximum security due to federal drug trafficking and intentional homicide charges. His operation was dismantled. The guards on his payroll were identified and terminated. The Latin kings in Coldwater lost their leadership, and their power structure collapsed within days. The Aryan Brotherhood fared no better. The deaths of their leadership created a power vacuum that descended into internal violence. 3 more members went to segregation for fighting. 2 were transferred to other facilities. By the end of the month, the Brotherhood's presence in Coldwater was effectively destroyed. Tyler Morrison, caught in the middle, flipped on everyone to save himself. He provided testimony that corroborated Martin's story, that Rico had been the architect of the operation, that Martin had been coerced, that the violence had been systematic and planned. Tyler's testimony sealed everyone's fate. And if he occasionally looked at his former teacher during those proceedings with something like suspicion, he kept it to himself, because Tyler, unlike most people, had paid attention in chemistry class. He understood reactions. He understood catalysts. He understood that sometimes the quietest person in the room was the most dangerous. The prison administration, embarrassed by the scope of the corruption and desperate to show decisive action, offered Martin a deal, his testimony in exchange for immediate parole. Time served. Record annotated to show cooperation with authorities. Martin accepted. 6 weeks after Rico Vega had threatened him in that storage room, Martin Hayes walked out of Coldwater Correctional Facility a free man. He stood in the parking lot, breathing air that tasted different than it had inside those walls. The same chemical composition, nitrogen, oxygen, trace elements, but somehow cleaner, lighter. His glasses were new, properly fitted. His blonde hair was neatly trimmed. He wore civilian clothes that hung a bit loose after 18 months of prison food. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what the official narrative claimed: a man who'd made a mistake, paid his debt, and gotten a second chance. Only Martin knew the truth. He'd entered Coldwater as a chemistry teacher who'd let curiosity override judgment. He'd left as something else entirely. Someone who understood that chemistry wasn't just about reactions in labs or classrooms. It was about understanding systems, identifying catalysts, and knowing that the right compound in the right place could bring down empires. 2 gangs had ruled that prison. Now both were destroyed. Dozens of violent criminals were facing extended sentences. Corrupt guards were fired. The balance of power had been completely restructured. All because one unassuming chemistry teacher had understood something that gangsters never learned. Knowledge, applied precisely and patiently, was more powerful than any physical force. Martin climbed into the taxi that would take him back to his old life, or whatever remained of it. As the prison disappeared in the rearview mirror, he allowed himself a small smile. Rico had wanted to use his chemistry knowledge as a weapon. Instead, Martin had used chemistry itself as a weapon. Against them. Against their violence. Against their certainty that force was the only currency that mattered. He'd taught them one final lesson. The most important one. Never underestimate a patient man with knowledge and time. The irony wasn't lost on Martin that he'd finally created the perfect lesson plan. Clear objective, precise methodology, measurable results, complete success. Chemistry, as he'd always told his students, wasn't just about memorizing formulas. It was about understanding how the world worked and having the wisdom to apply that understanding responsibly. His fascination with chemistry had gotten him punished and sent to prison. Yet that very same passion for chemistry would later turn the prison upside down and ultimately set him free.